We begin, as we always do, with ash and ink. It started with a game. Or at least, that's what I told myself. This is the story of Lynn. My wife, Lynn, and I have been together for 6 years and married nearly a year. In all our time together, nothing strange had ever happened. Lynn was thoughtful, kind, and never into pranks or scary things. I can't stress enough how out of character this whole thing is for her. She doesn't even like watching horror movies. She isn't into anything creepy and has never been into pranks. It's just not her cup of tea. And that's fine. But that's what was so strange about this. I should also mention that Lynn had never displayed signs of mental health issues. Of course, some people are good at hiding their struggles, but after 6 years together, I would like to think I would have noticed something. 2 months ago, I was in the kitchen making myself some coffee as I was late to work. I sipped my coffee quickly as I rushed toward the front door, barely paying attention. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of Lynn peeking around the corner, her eyes wide, partially hidden by a lock of her dark hair. Startled, I nearly spilled my coffee, feeling the hot liquid scald my lips. "Geez, Lynn," I exclaimed, wiping the coffee from my pants. "You nearly gave me a heart attack." As soon as I spoke, she ducked out of sight, like a child caught playing hide and seek. I heard her footsteps hurry away toward the living room, and by the time I reached the front door, she was nowhere to be seen. It was definitely strange, entirely unlike Lynn. But part of me was amused to see her acting playful and carefree for once. "Love you, you weirdo," I called out jokingly as I shut the door behind me, her laughter echoing faintly as I left. Although the encounter was odd, it wasn't concerning enough to dwell on. By lunchtime, I'd completely forgotten about it. And when I returned home later, Lynn seemed her usual self. Neither of us mentioned the morning's incident, and life moved forward without interruption. However, 3 nights later, something more unsettling occurred. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up feeling thirsty. As I stood in the dim kitchen, holding a jug of orange juice, an intense sensation crept over me. The unmistakable feeling of being watched. Instinctively, I glanced down and immediately froze. Lynn was there, crouched low, peering up at me from the other side of the kitchen island. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. Her smile stretched unnaturally wide, like the Cheshire Cat. The sight sent a jolt of fear racing through me, causing me to scream involuntarily. At my reaction, Lynn scurried backward out of sight, her hands and feet slapping against the kitchen tiles as she rapidly crawled away on all fours. I stood rooted in place, stunned and bewildered, struggling to process what had just happened. It took me a little longer than I'd like to admit to go back upstairs, but I eventually did. When I got to our bedroom, Lynn was lying on her side, asleep, or at least pretending to be. I stood there for a while, watching her breathing to be sure she really was asleep. I had the feeling she might jump out at me the moment I got into bed, but she didn't. I climbed into bed, and she didn't even move. Her breathing was soft and deep, and I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamt the whole thing. The next morning, I waited for her to come down for coffee, and after handing her a mug and kissing her cheek, I decided to ask her about it. "What was that about last night?" I asked, keeping my tone light so I didn't offend or embarrass her. She frowned over her cup of coffee, shaking her head like she had no clue what I was referring to. "You were peeking at me again." "From over there," I said, pointing to the spot on the floor by the kitchen island. She followed my gaze, and when she looked back at me, she burst out laughing. She laughed so hard that I couldn't help but join her. "You creep me the fuck out sometimes, you know that," I said. She giggled and set her cup on the counter and wrapped her arms around my neck. "You creep me out all the time. So I guess we're even," she teased. We said our goodbyes and headed out to work. As I drove, the unsettling image of Lynn's exaggerated grin and the eerie sound of her hands slapping against the kitchen floor lingered in my mind. I tried convincing myself that she was simply trying to engage with my love of horror, attempting to be playful and adventurous. I wasn't exactly afraid of her, but the entire incident left a lingering sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake off. I started seeing her peeking at me more and more. Sometimes, she'd be peeking out from behind the couch or living room curtains. Once she even managed to get inside her grandmother's old trunk that sits at the foot of our bed. I might not have even known she was there at all, had the trunk's old hinges not given her away. She'd had the lid propped up just enough so that only half of her face peeked through. She'd been grinning like an excited toddler. It was unnerving. I didn't even know what to say to her. All I could do was stare. When I finally found my voice, I asked her why on earth was she doing this. She didn't answer, but she had slowly closed the lid, shutting herself inside the trunk. I just walked away, feeling disturbed. I didn't understand why she was doing it, but it clearly made her happy. I just hoped she would tire of the game quickly. Lynn didn't peek at me for the next 2 weeks. I started to think she was done with her weird prank, and I was relieved. We were watching a show on Netflix one night, and I jokingly said that I hadn't seen her peeking at me lately, and that she must have given up on her spy game. She looked up at me with a small smile and said, "Maybe I've just gotten better at it." I didn't say anything, but I wondered whether or not she was joking. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Was she still peeking at me when I wasn't looking, and I just hadn't noticed? And if so, what the hell was she getting out of this? I started to feel paranoid, constantly checking whether she was watching from around the corner or behind a door. I was jumpy whenever I was home and she wasn't in full view of me. I felt stupid and a little crazy. But after a few weeks without another incident, I began to relax. I stopped checking behind furniture and walls and told myself it was just a bad memory. Then a few days ago, things got so much worse. Lynn left to go to a friend's, and I lounged on the couch and played a couple of games on my laptop. Around 9 p.m., I stepped into the shower, feeling the stress of the day wash away with the hot water. As I rinsed the soap from my hair, a familiar, unsettling sensation crept over me once again, the feeling of being watched. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and a jolt of pure terror shot through my body. Lynn's head protruded from behind the shower curtain, stretching unnaturally into the shower. Her body remained hidden behind the curtain, but her face was fully visible, dripping wet strands of dark hair hanging limply. Her mouth was stretched open into a grotesque, wide smile, and her eyes were painfully wide, rimmed with red as though she hadn't blinked in ages. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in 2 stark black streaks, making her appear both giddy and disturbingly deranged. I let out a scream, stumbling backward into the wall, my heart hammering against my chest. Lynn didn't flinch. Her unsettling grin remained perfectly fixed, her gaze unwavering. Fear paralyzed me as I stared back, utterly terrified. We stood like that for a few moments, neither of us saying a word. Finally, after what felt like forever, she slowly pulled her head back out of the shower, and I watched her blurry figure through the curtain as she moved backwards towards the bathroom door. A second later, the bathroom door slammed shut. hard enough to rattle the mirror. I screamed again and jumped out of the shower to lock the door. I stayed inside the bathroom for over an hour. Maybe I overreacted to some of you. But joke or not, I wasn't going to put up with the crazy shit anymore. That's what I kept telling myself as I paced in my bathroom, stopping to listen at the door every few minutes. Suddenly, I heard a muffled sound, and I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, straining to listen. I couldn't hear anything, but I envisioned Lynn standing on the other side of the door, giggling at her joke. I felt a surge of anger. I was beyond pissed at being made to feel scared in my own house, and made to hide in the bathroom for an hour. All for what? Some joke? If it was a joke, it was an awful one. What the fuck, Lynn? I snapped. This shit is getting really fucking annoying. I waited for her to apologize, or to call me a jerk. But instead, I heard a faint moan, so quiet I wondered if I heard it at all, and then complete silence. Lynn, I called out, not able to even hide the shakiness in my voice. I got no response, just my own heavy breathing. I swear to God, just fucking stop it, I yelled, pounding my fist on the door. I waited for her to cuss me out, something I would expect from me talking to her like that. I never screamed at her before, but there was nothing, just the occasional drip from the shower head. I won't pretend I wasn't terrified. I couldn't muster the courage to open the door and confront my own wife. Every minute that passed felt agonizingly long, each second filled with dread. After roughly half an hour, though it felt like an eternity, I decided I couldn't spend the entire night trapped in my own bathroom. Gathering my nerve, I dropped to my knees and cautiously peered beneath the door, bracing myself to see Lynn's smiling face staring back at me. To my relief, the hallway appeared empty. From my position, I could clearly see the top of the stairs, but there was no sign of her. Yet, the absence of her presence didn't comfort me. It only heightened my anxiety. I continued watching cautiously, half expecting to see her face suddenly appear. But nothing happened. I stood up, my hand hovering over the door, and mentally prepared myself to open it. I slowly turned the lock with shaky fingers and was about to yank it open when I heard a sound that still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. A moan, louder than before, but this time I was able to tell just where it was coming from. I turned my head to the closet door as if in slow motion and locked eyes with my wife, who was peeking out at me from the slight gap. Her eyes were still wide as ever, and her mouth was hanging open in the most grotesque, gaping smile I'd ever seen. I didn't even scream. I was too scared for even that. Her hands were clasped to her chest, body trembling with sheer delight, as if she could barely contain her excitement. A short, raspy moan bubbled up from her throat, deep and raw, sending a shiver through my entire body. Somehow, I mustered the courage to fling open the bathroom door and sprinted down the stairs without looking back. I snatched my keys and phone from the living room table as I rushed toward the front door, hearing Lynn's unsettling, shrill laughter echoing from somewhere behind me. The sound sent chills down my spine, but I didn't dare pause to glance back or close the door behind me. Barefoot, wearing nothing but damp boxers, I jumped into my car and drove away at reckless speeds, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. The chill of the night air mingled with my fear, making it hard to tell whether the shaking was from the cold or sheer terror. Probably both. I drove straight to my brother Chris's house about 40 minutes away, ignoring any and every call and text I got. I didn't check my phone until I was safely parked in my brother's driveway. Lynn had called 4 times and sent a flurry of texts, all wondering where I'd gone and why I left. Like that. I threw my phone at the dash in a rage, furious at her nonchalant attitude. My brother and his wife were surprised to see me, especially dressed in just a pair of boxers, but told me to stay as long as I needed. Chris lent me some clothes and asked me what happened. I told him Lynn and I had a fight, but didn't get into the details. I didn't want him to think I was overreacting, leaving my wife over a prank, even if it was a strange one. I mean, hadn't I encouraged her for years to lighten up instead of being so serious all the time? I had wanted her to relax and loosen up, but this was definitely not what I'd had in mind. I tried to sleep on their sofa, but my brain wouldn't let me sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lynn's face staring at me from inside the closet. Knowing she'd been in there with me the entire time made my skin crawl. She'd never left the fucking bathroom. At all. Instead, she slipped inside the closet and slammed the bathroom door shut to fool me. The mere thought of going back home gave me anxiety. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Chris ended up giving me a sleeping pill so I was able to get a little rest. My sleep was filled with terrible dreams, all of Lynn's smiling face. I woke up just as the sun started to rise. My sore body ached from the sofa, and I felt drained. I knew I'd have to call Lynn at some point, but I didn't know what to say to her. I wouldn't be going home unless she gave me her word she'd never do any more creepy shit. I just wanted my wife back. Her normal, serious self never looked so good to me. I was contemplating calling her and telling her that when that familiar feeling came over me. I was being watched. I was staring at the ceiling, my heart in my throat. I didn't want to look away, but the longer I ignored the feeling, the worse it got. My eyes drifted away from the ceiling almost on their own. Her face was pressed up against the window beside the couch, staring down at me with that same gaping smile. Drool dribbled down her lips, leaving 2 long streaks down the glass. I didn't know how long she'd been there, but something told me she'd been there quite a while, possibly all night. I didn't bother screaming, though I was afraid anger trumped any fear I felt at that moment. I jumped up from the couch and pounded my palm against the glass. "Lynn, are you crazy? What the hell is wrong with you? Just go home," I shouted. "Now!" She didn't move, and her ghastly expression never changed. If anything, her smile only grew, as if she had never been more elated. I could hear Chris and his wife moving around upstairs. As if Lynn could hear them from her place outside, her head twitched slightly in their direction, and she began to close her mouth, slowly. Chris called my name from upstairs, obviously concerned. I turned to see him and his wife Rebecca hurrying down the steps. When I turned back to the window, Lynn was gone. The only sign she'd been there at all was the 2 streaks of drool still dripping down the glass. I tried explaining to Chris and Rebecca about waking up to see Lynn watching me through their window. They were skeptical. Who wouldn't be? Chris and I went outside to the spot in front of the window, but there were no footprints in the dirt, just a slight indent. Animal, probably, Chris guessed, and I didn't argue. He and Rebecca assumed I dreamt the entire episode, but they didn't understand, and I was too tired to explain it to them. I called out of work that day and turned my cell off. I didn't want to face Lynn. Just talking to her was too much for me at that point. I really started to believe something was irreversibly wrong with her, that no matter what promises she made, we'd never be the same again. The thought saddened me to my core. I cried most of the morning. By noon, I figured I was ready to confront her. Give her one last chance to explain herself. I could at least give her that after 6 years, I told myself. I turned my phone on and saw the dozens of texts she'd sent, all from a seemingly concerned wife. Can we talk? I love you. Please call me. I'm really worried. Can you answer? Just come home. All the texts were variations of the same thing, telling me she loved me, begging me to come home, expressing how worried she was. Yet not one message even remotely acknowledged the disturbing things she'd done, as if crawling around on all fours, grinning like something out of a Stephen King novel, was perfectly normal behavior. Her messages were usually long-winded, detailed explanations, even when she just needed me to pick up bread. But now, after these bizarre episodes, her texts were short and oddly detached. You'd think she'd have a lot more to say after pulling something so utterly terrifying. I realize this might sound like an overreaction to someone outside of this madness, but trust me, if you'd seen Lynn's wide, unblinking eyes staring from behind closet doors, or watched her scurry away like a wild animal, grinning like a maniac, you'd understand exactly why I was so shaken. I ended up staying with Chris and Rebecca for another night. I didn't wake up yesterday until afternoon, and thankfully, I didn't see Lynn's face watching me through the window. I don't want to pry because it's not my place, but is this fight something that can be mended? Rebecca asked. She'd made us both a sandwich for lunch, and I knew she wanted to breach the subject without seeming to be nosy. I don't know. She's like a different person, I said, choosing my words carefully. I still wasn't ready for her or Chris to know the full extent of the batshit craziness I had been dealing with. People change, Ben, but she's still the same woman you married. Maybe you both just need to talk through your issues, whatever's going on. I'm sure it can be fixed, she said, ever the peacemaker. I think it's beyond that now. I don't think talking would help. I just don't trust her, I said. The words stung in my heart. I missed and loved my wife. But how could I live with someone like that? Living in constant fear didn't sound too appealing. Lynn loves you. She has to be absolutely crushed, she said. I don't know about that, I said. Well, she certainly seemed like it to me. I've never seen her so upset. Very much unlike the Lynn I know, Rebecca said, shaking her head sadly. It took a full minute for her words to really sink in, and when they did, I felt dread worming its way through my skin. Wait, what do you mean? You saw her? You saw Lynn? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Rebecca nodded casually, as if that fact wasn't nightmare fuel. Maybe, for her, it wasn't. She stopped by this morning just after Chris left for work, she said, cleaning the plates from the table. I didn't see her car, though. Maybe she took an Uber or something. Beck, what did she say? Did she come inside? I asked, sweat starting to break out on my forehead. I began looking around, examining corners as though a predator lurked behind them. She just asked if you were awake yet, and I said that you weren't. I asked if she wanted me to wake you, but she said no. Just said to let you sleep, she said as she washed the dishes. That's all. She didn't say anything else? I asked. She looked awful, though, like she hadn't slept in days. I think you should call her. I got up from the table and thanked Rebecca for lunch. I felt a little bit better at the knowledge that at least she hadn't come inside. Still, I needed to double-check that the doors were locked. I sat for a while trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't want to go home, but I felt that I owed it to Lynn to help her if I could. Hadn't I sworn an oath to love and honor her through sickness and in health? Clearly, she was very sick. If Lynn was sick, and deep down I truly believe she was, then I had a responsibility to help her. She was still my wife, but I had no idea where to begin. Calling the police didn't feel right. What could I even say? That my wife was peeking at me, acting creepy. As disturbing as her behavior had been, it wasn't illegal. Not yet, anyway. I imagined trying to explain it. Her crawling around the house, hiding in closets, staring at me with that grotesque grin. They'd think I was being dramatic, that it was just some weird, misguided joke. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. This wasn't a prank or a phase, or some quirky new side of her personality. It felt deeper than that. Off. Wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like there was something else behind her eyes. Something dark. Something dangerous. I knew as her husband I was well within my rights to have her committed. But what if she simply acted normal in their presence? She'd obviously been able to fool Rebecca into thinking she was just a concerned wife. As long as the doctors didn't find her a danger to herself or others, they'd have no choice but to release her after 72 hours. I felt lost and overwhelmed, so I did what any husband in my position would do. I called her mother. I didn't want to, believe me. Her mother, Marianne, and I were never on the best of terms. We'd never fought or anything like that. She just wasn't a very warm person and wasn't really easy to get along with. She hardly ever smiled, and when she did, only her lips would move into a thin-lipped smile, leaving her eyes as blank as before. She gave off this aura that felt like she was permanently on the offensive. I'd only met her twice, and both times were brief, uncomfortable encounters. It was clear she didn't think I was good enough for her daughter. Lynn always made an effort to cut those visits short, sensing how uneasy I felt in her mother's presence. I appreciated that more than she knew. Being around Marianne was like walking on glass barefoot, silent, sharp, and always one wrong step away from pain. She was cold, stiff, and emotionally impenetrable. I never once saw her truly smile, not with her eyes anyway. So when we moved 3 states away, I was relieved. I didn't miss her, not one bit. But now, as much as I hated the idea, I needed her. I needed someone, anyone, who might have insight into what was happening to Lynn. I really didn't want to talk to her at all, but I had to talk to someone, and someone who knew Lynn better than I did. So I grit my teeth and did what I had to. "Yes?" she answered, already sounding irritated. "Marianne, it's me, Ben. Do you have a minute to talk?" I asked. I could hear her cluck her tongue in irritation. "I'm in the middle of writing some checks, but if you insist, I suppose I can spare a moment." "What is it that you want to discuss, Benjamin?" she said, coolly. "It's about Lynn. She's been acting strangely, and I was wondering if you had any idea whether there was something." I was quickly interrupted. "It's a bit difficult to follow your rambling, Benjamin. What is that you want from me?" she asked. I could almost see her standing there in her thin sweater and slacks, tapping her fingernails impatiently on the table. "I wanted to know if you'd ever noticed any odd behavior, or possibly any mental health issues," I asked. There was a long, uncomfortable pause that I couldn't tell was because she was just thinking, or something else. Finally, after a few seconds, she spoke. "I'm not sure if this is one of your jokes, Benjamin, but if so, I don't find the humor in it. Now I do have business to attend to, as I've said, so if you don't mind," she said. But I cut her off before she could get rid of me. "Marianne, it's not a joke. I'm sincerely concerned about Lynn's mental health. Her behavior has been very erratic lately. I'm very worried about her, and I figured as her mother you would be as well," I said, my frustration evident in my voice. "If you're truly concerned, then I suggest you get the health professionals involved." "I don't know what you expect of me," she snapped. I could tell she was seconds away from hanging up, and for some reason I was desperate not to let her. I had the feeling that she knew a lot more than she was letting on. please. If not for me, do it for Lynn. I tried. I heard a faint, shaky intake of breath, as if she were trying to hold her steely persona together but failing. "Marianne, what's what?" I started. "Benjamin, I don't know what to tell you. My only advice would be to seek professional help. Do not call here again. Goodbye." I tried to call out to her, but she'd hung up. I tried to make sense of the call, of her coldness, her complete refusal to engage. Even if she didn't like me, even if she thought I was the problem, why wouldn't she want to help her own daughter? It didn't add up. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, hoping I'd catch something I missed, some clue buried in her words. Eventually, I nearly gave up. But then I remembered her final words. Seek professional help. The way she said it, sharper than the rest of her tone, almost forced, like she was slipping something past a filter. It hadn't struck me at first, but now it felt deliberate, urgent. Maybe she meant doctors, therapists, or maybe it was someone else, someone she couldn't say out loud. Was I reading too much into it? Possibly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more she wasn't saying. Maybe she was afraid to say it. When Chris got home, I finally sat down with him and Rebecca. It wasn't easy, and I didn't tell them everything. How could I? It sounded insane. But I did share what happened that night. How I found Lynn crouched in the closet, peeking at me with that monstrous grin. I told them enough to know she needed serious help. Thankfully, they believed me, or at least believed that something was seriously wrong. They were obviously shocked, but they also just wanted to help her. Still, they didn't think it was all that serious. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. They just kept saying that Lynn had to be playing some kind of weird joke. Maybe for YouTube, Rebecca offered, if only half-heartedly. Chris didn't think we should involve the police just yet. He offered instead to go with me, and I readily accepted. He reasoned that calmly talking to her, trying to coax her into going willingly, was the best recourse. I agreed to do it his way. At least, I wouldn't be going into that house alone. We drove over this morning, just after breakfast. There was no way I was going at night. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach began doing somersaults. Her car wasn't there, but I still didn't let my guard down. The front door was slightly open, just enough to leave a dark sliver between it and the frame. For a brief, horrifying moment, I expected to see her eyes peering through that crack, wide, unblinking, waiting. My heart was pounding. Sweat trickled down my back, despite the morning chill. Chris, on the other hand, looked completely unfazed. He stood casually behind me, hands in his pockets like he was about to stroll into a cafe, not the place that had turned my life into a waking nightmare. I envied him. His ignorance, his calm. I took a shaky breath and pushed the door open. The smell hit us immediately, a thick, sour wave of rot that clung to the back of my throat. Chris recoiled slightly, his nose wrinkling in disgust. "Jesus, what died in here?" he muttered. I didn't answer. I already knew whatever it was. It wasn't going to be good. The house was deadly quiet and dark, despite being 10 in the morning. All the curtains were closed up tight, refusing to allow any sunlight inside. If I hadn't left it just 2 days prior, I'd have thought the house to be abandoned. We moved through each room, carefully checking any place that she might hide, occasionally calling her name. "Why are you looking under the couch?" Chris asked eventually. "Aren't we looking for your wife?" He was looking at me like I was a moron. "Let's just go upstairs," I whispered. He shook his head, but followed me up the stairs to check the bathroom and spare bedroom. On the way up, my shoes crunched over pieces of glass that looked to be littered over a few of the steps. As we made our way up the stairs, something caught my eye. A frame along the wall, crooked and empty. One of our wedding portraits. The glass was completely gone, shattered, likely swept away or scattered somewhere. I stopped for a moment and stared at it. It had been taken just outside the church, right after our vows. Lynn was glowing in her white gown, her eyes soft, her smile real. I used to love that photo. I used to love looking at that face. Now, I could barely recognize it. It was hard to believe that same face had stared at me from behind curtains, from under doors, from the crack of a closet, smiling in a way no human should. I forced myself to move on. We checked the spare bedroom next. It looked untouched, eerily normal compared to everything else in the house. Nothing out of place, nothing obviously disturbed. Then came the bathroom. I froze in front of the door. The memory of that night surged up like bile, her head poking through the curtain, that awful grin, the steam, the cold spike of fear. Chris picked up on my hesitation. "Want me to go in first?" he offered gently. I shook my head. "Number we go together." We stepped inside slowly. The air was stale, heavy, but otherwise everything was exactly how I'd left it. No blood, no broken glass, no Lynn, just the same suffocating silence. "I don't think she's here, Ben. Why don't you pack some clothes and we'll try coming back tomorrow or something," Chris said. I nodded and went into our bedroom and shoved some clothes into a duffel bag. When I checked inside our closet, I came across the source of the smell and gagged. Chris took one look and lost all color in his face. He had to go stand by the stairs to get away from the sight and smell. I gazed down in shock at what lay inside my bedroom closet. Soaking into the rug were at least a dozen eyeballs, all carefully laid out in pairs. Some were as large as a quarter, while others were as tiny as a marble. I stared down at the eyes she'd collected from small animals, and I wondered how she'd gotten them, and shuddered at the thought. Everything in me told me to run, but I forced it away. This was my wife. No matter how twisted, she was still the woman I married. I had to help her. "Lynn," I said softly. She didn't respond, but her head bobbed back and forth in two quick little movements as if she were nodding. "Baby, I just want to help, okay? Can you let me do that?" I asked. I had taken a single step forward, approaching her like some kind of dangerous animal. "I love you, Lynn," I said softly, taking another step closer. She let a tiny moan escape her wide-open mouth, and I had to resist the urge to run. Her shoulders were starting to quiver, and her eyes grew as large as saucers. I crouched down so I could see her better, and immediately saw the blood. Her hands were covered in it. They trembled more the closer I got, as if she was barely able to contain herself. "Lynn, are you hurt? You're bleeding," I said. She bobbed her head again, her bloody fingers moving up and down as if playing an invisible piano. They occasionally grazed her chin, leaving smears of blood on her skin. I wanted to recoil in disgust. The smell that was coming off of her was revolting. I could feel the vomit trying to climb up my throat. Her lips were dry and stretched thin, blood seeping between the cracks. I knew she wouldn't come out on her own, but I didn't want to leave her in the state she was in. I scooted closer and reached out to her. The excited hiccuping sounds got louder, and her hands shook, fingers flexing. It was then that I could see the blood oozing from in between her fingers. "Oh my God. Lynn, you're bleeding," I said. Instinctively, I reached out to take her hand, but before I could even touch her, her hand sprang out towards me. A sharp pain shot through my arm, and I fell back on my arse. My arm burned, and I could see the blood dripping down onto the carpet. I looked back at her in shock and saw her grinning madly, her fingers clutching a large shard of glass. "You all right in there?" Chris asked from behind me. I turned my head slightly and nodded to him, cradling my arm to my chest. When I turned back to face Lynn, I saw that her focus had shifted. She wasn't looking at me anymore, and she wasn't smiling anymore either. She was staring past me, her eyes glaring at Chris, the way a hungry lion might stare at an antelope. Her mouth was still hanging open, but it was twisted into a snarl. I got to my feet and began walking backwards down the hall, afraid to take my eyes off her. "Are you bleeding?" Chris asked. The moment the words left his mouth, Lynn started fast, scooting out from under the bed, the glass shard still in her fist. "Chris, run! Go!" I yelled. He must have been too afraid to move because a second later, I felt my back bump into him. He was still standing at the top of the stairs, staring at the horror that was my wife. Lynn had crawled completely out from under the bed and stood in the bedroom doorway, her face twisted in rage. Her whole body was visibly tense. Blood ran down her fingers and onto the floor. "Jesus, Lynn," Chris said. "You are playing hide and seek." I reached back and pushed him towards the steps. "Move your ass, Chris," I said as quietly but firmly as I could. Lynn bobbed her head in fast, sharp motions and began to grin, stretching her mouth open wider and wider so that her chin seemed to touch her chest. I heard Chris mutter a prayer, and then he was running down the stairs. I stood at the top of the steps, stuck between the love for a woman who clearly needed serious help and self-preservation. "I only want to help," I said, choking back tears. Her eyes focused on me once again as she slowly lifted the glass, holding it out in front of her. And then she started sprinting towards me, grinning with utter excitement. Thankfully, my body took over, and I flew down the stairs, skipping 2 or 3 at a time. I made it to the front door before I felt her leap onto my back, wrapping her arms around my neck, her open mouth next to my ear, so that I could hear those terrible hiccuping sounds up close. I shook her off me, knocking her to the floor. I felt a searing pain in my back as she went, but I tore open the front door and bolted to my car. Chris was standing in the front yard, talking on the phone with the police. I didn't say a word. I just ran to my car and jumped in. Chris took the hint and followed me. Still on the line with 911, I watched the rear-view mirror, sure I'd see her there, running after us. But I never did. I went straight to the ER and got 11 stitches in my arm and 3 on my back. The police asked a lot of questions and went back to the house to do a search. But of course, Lynn wasn't there. They advised me to stay with a friend or relative for a while and to file a restraining order as soon as I could, but none of those things would matter. Somehow, I just knew. I dropped Chris off at home and went to a motel an hour away. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Lynn as I could. This is where I've been for the last 4 hours. I thought maybe the police would find her. Maybe they'd get her the help she desperately needs. But now I don't think so. Because 40 minutes ago I got a text from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "I found you," and a picture attached. The picture was dark and grainy, but I instantly knew what it was. There was no mistaking my wife's eye.